Welcome, friends,
to the How-To Heretic.
I'm Uncle Mark.
And I'm Uncle Dan.
And I'm Uncle Doug.
And this is your user's guide to life on the outside.
That's right. Leaving religion is the first step into a larger, better world.
Boot, it can also be a scary world. Things work differently now.
Never fear, that's why we're here.
We're your audio uncles. And with help from good friends and experts in all sorts of fields,
we're going to share the stories and seek the knowledge to build a great life.
After all, you only get the one that we know of, so you better make the most of it.
Well, guys.
Hello.
Well, hello.
We have reached Epistlesode 150.
What?
Everyone gets a Pontiac.
And then immediately gives it to the person on their left.
Yes. Imagine finding out all of a sudden that you got a Pontiac. Okay.
Oh, great.
Neato. Oh, I got the Aztec. That's fancy.
Super. Here we are, episode 150, $1.50. They said it couldn't be done. I don't know who they are.
The Sesquicentennial.
The Sesquicentennial. We're only 79 away from episode 229. So if you think about it that way.
Man, how do you even...
It's something,
now, we should probably stop the show at this point.
It's something. Well, Dan, you are going to help us find our way.
I am, yes. I'm going to... because you're mine, I walk the line.
I love it. And anytime you can bring Johnny Cash into the intro is a good time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about a super fun subject about a little exchange program that is over, and I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, just trust us. It'll be the most cheerful thing you've heard all day.
All day.
And then I am going to mispronounce every city in the Middle East and bring the Book of Acts to a merciful close.
Not just the Middle East, like pretty much the entire Mediterranean basin.
Yeah, I got them all wrong.
It's pretty impressive. And then quick announcement. Last week we announced that we have a friend and our single Ugandan listener who lives in an Islamic community and told a friend in confidence that he was an atheist. And that friend decided to tell everybody in his life, and he's in a pickle. So his name's Shabu, and he's a graphic designer, and he took a couple of our designs and we threw some shirts up that he put his spin on the Heretic, our merch site, and holy shit, did you guys show up?
Yeah, for real. So
I
cool.
hope you keep doing it.
Please keep doing it. We'll announce it a couple more times. But you fucking really, this community is crazy and amazing. And, I was able to transfer a substantial sum to him, and he wanted me to tell you guys that he's blown away, and we bought him some space to kind of make some plans and figure his shit out, because he's kind of in a pickle. So
yeah.
Thank you so much from him and from us.
It was alarming. Like the first day we announced this came out, you guys were just pounding the website.
Yeah.
So thank you for being so kind and generous and wonderful.
Yeah, and if you want, go there, order it. You get a cool shirt. He gets some dough, and he's a talented graphic designer and a 3D modeler, and does animations. So if anybody's interested, if anybody has a project, email me, and I will share his portfolio so you can see his work. And he's a great fucking guy, and you guys did something really beautiful. And let's keep it up for a bit and see if we can
Yep.
make
if
more
you haven't
better.
done it yet, there's still time. Get onto Heretic and look for his designs.
We will leave the shirts up basically forever. So as long as somebody buys them, the money will go to him. So thanks for doing that, you guys. You're the best. And let's do a show.
Uncle Mark.
We.
In spite of everything, sometimes I think the world isn't crazy enough. And that, we humans have such a proclivity to invent craziness where we don't need it. So with everything that's going on, I think we need some distraction with some pointless, maybe harmless, I'm hoping.
Yeah, crazy is to humanity what a bad boyfriend is, right? We just can't quit it.
Right?
Just can't get away from this fucking guy, right?
Well,
Even if we want to.
yeah, exactly. Which we don't. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, fellas, I'm going to take you on a roller coaster ride of I'm going to say of truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to expose you to some real truths about the universe.
That's all we do.
And I hope that you guys can keep up because this shit is legit.
All right.
First, I want to start by this. I'm going to send your mind back to the year 1987.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Bon Jovi's "Living on a Prayer" was topping the charts.
Yeah.
Gorbachev introduced the ideas of glasnost and perestroika.
Good year.
Yeah. The world was in love with adorable serial rapist Bill Cosby. And Cher picked up a Best Actress Oscar for managing to chew even more scenery than Nicolas Cage in Moonstruck.
She bit his hand off.
But
True story.
that is a fact.
Yeah.
But none of these were important in the grand scheme of things. And I mean the grand scheme, like grand. What was important?
I don't think they were important in the petite scheme, but fair enough.
That may be fair. What was important in 1987, as you'll recall, was that all the wars of mankind stopped forever.
Yeah.
Remember that? It was amazing, right?
Sure. I
And
think the
how
people
did
of
that
Nicaragua
happen?
would differ with you, but
You
sure.
shut your mouth,
Yeah.
because that was the year of the harmonic convergence, which, as we all remember, was an event in mid-August of that year coordinated by spiritual author Jose Arguelles, based on the calculations of Tony Shearer in his 1971 book, Lord of the Dawn, where he figured out correct interpretations of ancient Aztec calendar predictions.
Oh, no.
Dan, why are you rehashing this? Everyone knows this.
I know.
Yeah.
I just try. You got to lay the foundations, right? We got to all start on the same page. So, just to be clear about this, I'll quote a paragraph from Wikipedia just so that everybody can be sure to follow along. Quote, according to Shearer's interpretation of Aztec cosmology, the selected date marked the end of the 22 cycles of 52 years each, or 1,144 years in all. The 22 cycles were divided into 13 heaven cycles, which began in AD 843 and ended in 1519.
Because what divides into 22 better than 13?
Correct.
Yes.
When the 9 hell cycles began, ending 468 years later in 1987. The very beginning of the 9 hell cycles was precisely the day that Hernan Cortez landed in Mexico, April 22nd, 1519, coinciding with one read on the Aztec/Mayan calendar, the day sacred to Mesoamerican cultural hero Quetzalcoatl. The 9 hell cycles of 52 years each ended precisely on August 16th to 17th. I don't know how that's precisely.
One or the other.
In 1987.
Exactly one or the other.
So, boom! Is your mind blown?
It's something.
I love the idea that Cortez is on the calendar.
Yeah.
Right? And that you could see these Aztecs back in 15 whatever it was going, it says here this guy Cortez is arriving. Should we be worried about this?
Do you guys know what this is? What's this little blip here in the 1519? Do you guys know what that is? I'm sure something good will happen. Yeah, anyway.
That year had a little Enye over it on their calendar that they didn't understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. Even if your minds weren't blown, Jose Arguelles' mind was blown. And he organized a global day of meditation for peace centered in Sedona, Arizona.
Why not?
And that's a very important point. It had to be Sedona. Why? Well, we wouldn't have been able to achieve global peace without the vortexes, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's switch gears a bit. What would you say if I told you that a UFO hunter was scouring images of the ocean on Google Earth and discovered what appear to be 2 pyramids in the water near the Bahamas, right in the region known as the dreaded Bermuda Triangle?
You're speaking my language, man.
Like, they really look like man-made pyramids. Well, one's a little wonky, but the other looks perfect. Basically Giza, but in the ocean.
Yeah.
I have seen that image, you guys. And I got to say, that image presumably taken from a plane, is pretty convincing. There definitely seemed to be something that, from that exact angle, resembles a pyramid structure, and another structure next to it from the same angle doesn't. But if you could look at it,
Is it a kind of mid?
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. You
Close
catch
enough.
You catch it kind of squinty like.
Yeah.
You're golden.
Sort of mid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, current scientists will tell you, and I mean scientists will tell you, that this is not a, quote, meaningful discovery, and that it's just a picture of rocks on the ocean floor. But what if I told you that 10 to 13,000 years ago was the end of the last glacial period, and that before that, the sea levels were significantly lower than they are now, which means that there could have been ancient humans, or extra humans, cultures living far out in places that are now covered by the ocean? What if I told you that there were highly advanced civilizations building huge complex structures that are now lost to us because they're underwater? But Uncle Dan, you say, the Pyramid of Giza was built about 4,000 years ago. There's no way that people 13,000 years ago or more had technology to build megalithic structures. But are you sure? Isn't that just what they want you to believe?
Right.
Don't the scientists just need to protect the narrative that they've been pushing all this time? Isn't that what science is about? Staying locked into the same thinking and never altering regardless of proof? Ha!
Because reasons.
Because reasons. Money. It's
always money.
Follow the
sweet
money.
Grants.
Exactly. So, hold that thought. Let's talk about ancient England, shall we?
Can we talk about ancient England?
Right?
Finally.
Look, let me introduce you to the work of English antiquarian Alfred Watkins. In the 1920s, he was driving in part of the Hereford countryside that he knew quite well, and he realized something. He could draw a straight line between several prominent historical structures. He took to survey maps and found that, sure enough, shit lined up, like, perfectly.
But that doesn't explain why he was so against Quarians.
Well,
Yes.
you got to take a position one way or t'other.
Well, Doug, maybe
You
he
gotta
ends
be
up
pro
pro-Quarian
or-
by the end.
Yeah, exactly. We don't
Change
know.
your mind, Doug.
Here we go. So, there he is. He's looking at it. He pulls out some survey maps. Further research led him to write his 1929 book, The Old Straight Track, where he theorized that ancient Brits had a penchant for traveling in very straight lines, regardless of terrain, and that the structures were mark points to show the way.
Has he ever driven in British traffic? Because I don't think that's a thing.
No. Well, that's because you're not tuned into the ancients the way
Oh, sure. That's
the
probably
way
it.
Watkins was. He called these tracks ley lines, from the Middle English ley or lee, meaning a tract of open ground or pasture. His theory actually gained some traction, and soon groups formed to hunt down ley lines all over England. In 1926, eager Watkins acolytes formed the Straight Track Club, and more ley lines were discovered.
I think I was in that for a while in high school.
They kicked you out based on one of those words.
Yeah.
That's just what they call a running group in Utah County.
Yeah, exactly. Now, mind you, once again, the scientific community was too caught up in their narrow-minded view to see what was becoming more and more obvious. They raised trivial objections. They complained that a single ley line included structures from vastly different eras of history, and the fact that there are technically so many old structures on that damned island that almost any straight line is bound to cross several of them.
Yeah, totally.
But these intrepid line makers soldiered on. Well, that is until Watkins died in 1935, and then the Second World War kind of distracted everybody for a bit. It wasn't until the 1960s that things really picked up for ley lines. That, as you know, was a time of huge mumbo-jumbo. I'm sorry. I mean spiritual awakening.
It was the great age of picking up what had been dropped long ago.
And what was rightly dropped.
Yeah.
And rebranding it. So people were finally seeing through the bullshit, man. They were seeing the truth of things. So ley lines got their second chance at fame when somebody realized that they weren't about topographically idiotic ancient trailways, but about the lines of mystical power. Oh. These are spiritual energy pathways and that the ancients understood, but became lost in our era of narrow-minded paying attention to facts. So now we finally understood that the Earth was crisscrossed by very powerful energy lines. But why? What do they do? Can we find a way to make them incredibly annoying?
The Earth is crossed by incredibly powerful lines. You just don't want to touch them because you'll explode. There's high-tension power lines everywhere.
That's true.
Yeah,
they even go under the ocean.
So wrong on you, Dan.
Well, let's keep talking because there's more to this than meets the eye. Pretty quickly after the idea started gaining traction, somebody figured it all out. These structures weren't there for humans to find their way. In 1961, a guy named Tony Webb published Skyways and Landmarks, a book in which he concluded that Watkins' lines were markers for... Anyone?
Okay.
Aliens.
Duh.
Yes.
Landing lights for aliens, right?
It's obvious when you think about it, right? Alien spacecraft would need to navigate the Earth somehow, and these lines of ancient castles and churches and stone circles and whatever were way better than using, I don't know, much larger and more prominent natural landmarks that could be seen from much higher up.
See, Dan, I don't know why you waste so much time with this, like all this filler. Why don't you just go crazy old Brit, 1960s, aliens, Jews. Done. We can do this whole thing in 30 seconds.
You just drew a ley line.
I sure did.
I love the idea that aliens traveling from, even the nearest star can navigate the light years of time and
emptiness.
Space.
Yeah.
But that last quarter mile is just a mystery to them.
It's just like, fuck, I'm lost.
Yeah.
Where is Islington? Anyway,
that's on the town sign.
It's not just about aliens. I mean, it's definitely about aliens, but it's not just about aliens, right? Because what about the energy? And this can't just be about England, right? Other places need to feel special too. So people started to look at the bigger picture. They started to draw lines between the amazing structures of the ancient world. Ones that were probably built by aliens, but because there weren't any, white people around at the time. And get this. Everything lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
And this is a fact. If you draw a line, for example, from the Great Pyramid of Giza all the way around the world to the Mayan pyramid at Chichen Itza, and I did this, that line passes directly through a part of Spain that's only 600 miles south of Stonehenge. Coincidence? I think not.
That is the nearest near miss ever.
Right?
Like that, because that's only like 599.6 miles south of the parking lot at Stonehenge.
Boom.
You know what I mean?
If your mind's not blown by now, I don't know what's going on. So, What about this? Here's another good one. If you start on an island off the coast of Ireland and draw a line to Mount Carmel, Israel, you'll cross 7 prominent churches or structures named after St. Michael. That includes the stunning St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, the gorgeous Mont Saint-Michel in France, and a whole bunch of other places that you haven't heard of. And it's known as St. Michael's Sword. And I've seen several maps of this, and it's actually pretty amazing. The line is perfectly straight.
Wow.
Now, of course, there are doubters who say that maps are drawn by humans and that the ones that I saw were all really highly fudged and that the sites are anywhere from 14 to 42 kilometers off of the true line. But hey!
Wait.
That's pretty
14
close.
and 42?
Whoa.
Hold up.
Whoa, did you
Hold
guys catch
up.
it? 1442. That's got, both of those have a 4 in
Yeah.
a different position.
And 2 follows 1.
2 follows.
Holy shit.
Look, you guys, you can't make this stuff up. This is as legit as it gets. Anyway, and also...
And added up, it's 9, and that's German for no.
Boom!
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, this St. Michael's line, you don't have to worry about the fact that Europe is positively littered with churches dedicated to Michael, but
Yeah.
just look at the line. It's amazing.
Michael was a crowd favorite.
Right, absolutely. There's another St. Michael's line, actually, that's just in England, going kind of in the opposite direction. That's like follows the path of the sun on St. Michael's Day, and it has a whole bunch of things along it too, a whole bunch of points along that line. So, man, it's kind of hard to dispute it when you see it. But what does all this have to do with underwater pyramids and celebrations of Aztec predicted peace in Arizona? Ley lines, man. Energy. Don't you get it yet? Look, the ancients were much more attuned to the Earth's energy than we are. Which ancients? All of the ancients. Everywhere. From every period. So they knew where the shit was flowing. You know, they knew it hardcore. And they knew that sometimes those energy lines would get too intense. So they would build these things to balance the energy out.
Oh.
Maybe that was a pyramid. I mean,
So a
we've
pyramid
talked
is like a giant resistor.
yeah,
Yeah,
or
it
a
makes sense.
conductor, or yeah, exactly, exactly. Because we've talked about how powerful those shits are.
Yeah.
You know, with their power and all.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a circle of giant rocks. Obvious when you think about it.
Yeah.
For fixing or maybe enhancing energy, you know, from the earth,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe it's a bunch of enormous sculptures of heads on an island somewhere. How else do you explain all those things?
That's
I
really
mean-
the only explanation.
Come on.
Yeah.
Which brings me to Sedona. Set into an Arizona landscape so beautiful that you can't help but feel awestruck. Except you're not. It's not awe that you're feeling. It's vortexes. Because Sedona, Arizona is a place where the Earth's powerful energy ley lines converge. But Uncle Dan, you might ask, or you might demand, or you might say, the plural of vortex is vortices. But you shut your whore mouth. In Sedona, they're vortexes and they're beautiful. So now,
Dan,
yes,
what are they in Texas?
all my vortexes lie in
In Texas.
Arizona.
And that's why all your vortices are in Tennessee's. Just
Oh.
they teach you that in school so you can keep it straight. It's one of those
Right,
little
exactly.
mnemonics, right?
They're helpful devices. They really
Yeah.
are. So, now, if you go to any of a number of places in and around Sedona, including Airport Mesa, Cathedral Rock, Bell Rock, Boynton Canyon, you're likely to see incredibly sincere, barefoot people standing with their arms outstretched, eyes closed, just soaking up that sweet, sweet energy.
Yeah.
From the earth that's totally there.
Yeah. It's not
And-
the blazing hot Arizona sun above them that they're feeling.
Right, yeah, exactly. They're not sun-stroked and
Right.
feeling like they're ready to pass. They're
I
not
got a vortices
lightheaded.
burn.
That's right. you can get it. Because let me tell you something. There are 3 types of vortexes. So apparently the energy that we're talking about is electromagnetic. And as long as you don't know anything about electromagnetism, you'll be fine with these distinctions. The magnetic vortexes have a feminine or yin energy, which means that they are very nurturing and soft. Stay with me.
When I think of a vortex, I think nurture.
What you want is to be hugged by your vortex.
Yeah. Well, you will be eventually as it crushes you.
Yeah.
Sure.
The electrical vortexes, on the other side, on the other hand, have a masculine or yang energy, and they're very energizing, and they help with increased stamina and power. And then there's a third kind, which is the balanced vortexes that have both kinds of energy, so they, balance you.
They're
So
non-binary, which is cool. Great. Love it.
which is great. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So what's great about these being electromagnetic in nature is that we can totally test for that. We can prove that ley lines exist. I mean, not with, scientific instruments designed to register electromagnetic fields. That doesn't work. Although, this one guy that I heard about totally took his compass to a vortex, and it went crazy. So, there's that. Sure. But you can test for it with things like dowsing rods and pendulums and crystals. Basically anything that has the word spiritual attached to it should be fine.
Yeah.
And there you go. Ask your friend Brenda and her boyfriend River about it. It's totally true.
I love River.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like hanging out with him at parties, but he's if he's not
Well, he
stoned,
always brings his guitar, and it's just like,
got
dude.
good weed.
He does have good weed.
Does have good weed. It's funny. I smiled the other night when you told me you were doing this story, Dan, and I was watching the first Hellboy movie.
Oh,
and I love those movies, especially the first two. The third one I didn't think was kind of had the zazz.
Right.
It didn't have Ron Perlman, but when Rasputin was getting ready to summon the void or whatever, and they were on that little Scottish island, the young version of the doctor guy was talking about how it's on a ley line.
Right.
And I just had a little smile. I'm like, oh, stupid and dumb and wonderful and fun.
It's funny because while I kind of, one of the things that I kind of got lost in while I was researching this was that I discovered how I could on Google Maps, on Google Earth, I could draw direct lines from place to place.
Uh-huh.
And so I decided I would create my own ley line and just see what would happen. So I literally I started at the Pyramid of Giza and then took it all the way to Sedona, Arizona, just to see what was on that line.
Graceland.
No, but I will actually. I'm going to walk you through it. I wasn't planning on it, but I'm going to walk you through it. Here we go. It crosses right directly over the Paleo Castro Monastery on the island of Mykonos. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Then the Ozren Monastery in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So they're amazing.
That's a favorite.
Really close pass by the Bayreuth Festspielhaus in Germany. That's the opera house designed by Wagner himself.
There you go.
Straight over the Magdalena Kirche in Weissenfeld by Coburg in Bavaria.
That's a vortex all its own.
Right, exactly. Directly over the Dunotter Castle in Scotland.
Yeah.
Then it cuts off a tail of Greenland, but there's nothing there, so, just Greenland. Then directly over Resolution Island in Canada that also has nothing on it. Cuts a couple of giant swaths out of Ontario and Manitoba and manages to miss anything important at all, which was kind of funny. And then...
There's literally nothing important in Manitoba, so the ley line is obviously a lie.
Right, exactly. And then it goes almost directly over Mount Rushmore, which I thought was amazing.
That's funny.
So there you go.
Well, I think you've proved the point.
I've proved it. I've proved it. What's really funny and what hippies will hate is that it misses the Crazy Horse Monument by over 5 miles. So it hits Mount Rushmore it's within a mile of Mount Rushmore.
Based on ley line proximities, 5 miles is a direct hit.
Right. Well, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Well, that's good. Now I know this, and I'm going to go huff nitrogen oxide until I forget it. So
yeah. I think that is fair.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go consult my crystal, and we can move on.
Uncle Doug.
Oh.
Do you remember being a young guy in the before now times when it was okay to play things like Cowboys and Indians?
Yes. And we used to play at my elementary school. We used to play a game called Smear the Queer.
Oh, they were simpler times.
Yes.
Simpler times for certain of us.
It was easier to be white, wasn't it?
Well, it was definitely easier to hate non-white, and that was a classic thing to do.
Or to kind of love them.
That's what's great is that, you, Uncle Mark, are now going to tell us about a fine way, a beautiful way to love our non-white brethren.
Yes, to dress up, hate is love, and feel okay about yourself. So that's just a fucking wonderful world. So You know, you guys would remember last week when I did a segment about the invisible environmental stewards of that most charming of magical islands, that being Iceland and they being called the Huldufolk.
Yes.
And we basked for one bright, glorious moment in a topic of faith or belief free from white supremacy and hate. Well, party's over, motherfuckers. that streak of one segment in a row is finally over. So for any listeners that may be unfamiliar with this country's attitude toward our indigenous population, because either you are from a distant land or you were educated in the United States, let me fill you in. It's always been, horrendous. So from mass displacement, a sort of informal but very welcome biological warfare, straight genocide, enslavement, more displacement, more murder, and endless theft. We have much to be ashamed of and not one goddamn thing to be proud of since the day Christopher Columbus set his buckled shoe on what he thought was the shore of India. Today's segment is another thread in that tapestry of pain, I'm sorry to say. As we know via actual science, the indigenous peoples of these continents, the Americas, are descended from Asian immigrants who crossed into North America quite some time ago. It has long been estimated that it was like 15,000 years, but there's this really crazy new evidence that it might be 30,000 years or more.
Oh, wow.
And also, this is fascinating, new science suggests that Americans have an ancient line of Polynesian DNA, which is cool.
I just wonder. I wonder about that 30,000 year thing, because were there even Jews then?
There's always, and there always will be. Yeah, I was just going to say, spoiler alert about the Polynesian DNA. Polynesian, still not Jewish. So that's cool.
Rough.
Anyway, indigenous Americans were very much here first, and they are of Asian ancestry. Those are conclusively true facts, except maybe they aren't. Let's, for a moment, ignore all the archaeology, anthropology, and ironclad DNA research done by countless researchers and scientists over decades, and turn rather to the ideas of a hick with almost no education, born 20 miles north of nowhere in 1805. This learned fellow concluded, via a huge golden book he found out past the back fence, that no one else ever saw, written in a language that never existed, which he translated with some magic spectacles, actually a rock in his top hat, that actually indigenous Americans are descended from a single family of Jewish seafarers that landed here around 600 BCE. No, dear listeners, they are not descended from Jared's brother and his brother Jared, who came across the Atlantic 1,400 years before that in 8 combination barnyard cement mixers, as discussed in episode 146. Those immigrant Jews all died out, just miraculously not in their suicidally defective submarines. All the proof you need of this peer-reviewed book of totally true shut-up science, still bafflingly believed by millions of people with good educations, is called simply the Book of Mormon.
I love the idea of a listener listening to this segment. This is the first episode of the show they've listened to.
Just going, wait, what?
What?
What is happening? Is he having a stroke? So, kind of. So, cut to the mid-1840s. An act of land-grabbing, violent conquest brought some folks called the Mormons into proximity with some of these indigenous Jews that Mormons call the Lamanites of the Western variety. So, Utes and Paiutes and Goshutes, and most importantly for today's story, the Navajo. Most white settlers in the American West saw the original inhabitants as pests, an infestation needing to be exterminated or chased off. So I guess the Mormon attitude toward them was a tad better by comparison. Don't get me wrong, Mormon settlement throughout the West likely killed off thousands of people and displaced thousands more. Mormons had no problem killing them when push came to shove. They also tried to frame them for some certain crimes. And they did participate in the indigenous slave trade by buying captured native children from native and Mexican slave traders, ostensibly to, quote, free them. However, the bulk of these children experienced their freedom as servants in Mormon households for the rest of their lives.
Freedom.
Right.
Yeah, ish. So that little snag is...
There's a street up in Research Park here in Salt Lake City that's named after Chief Wakara or somebody.
Who was a slave trader, correct?
Who was a slave trader, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fun thing. That's a fun fact.
It's nice that he has a street named after him.
Yeah.
So this little snag aside, Mormons did see indigenous people as part of their own story, So however poorly and patronizingly, there were attempts to deal with them in ways other than gunfire. Spencer W. Kimball, who would later rise through the ranks of the church to eventually become its prophet, seemed to have an actual affinity for the Navajo people. He became instrumental in setting up what became known as the Indian Placement Program, also known as the Indian Student Placement Program, and most unfortunately, the Lamanite Placement Program, when he helped place a young Navajo girl with a white Mormon family for a school year in the truly horrible town, Utah town of Richfield in 1954, which I think our current governor is from, right?
I think so.
Explains a lot. Before long, the Indian Placement Program, or IPP, became formalized, and between 1954 and 1996, around 50,000 Native children, most of them Navajo, but not all, passed through it for varying periods of time. The program... What's that?
I'm sorry. I just have to emphasize the fact that, because I sometimes lose the plot when I'm listening to something like this, we're not talking about, like, frontier times.
No.
We're talking 20th century, like, middle of the 20th century.
The last kid who went through this program graduated from high school in 2000.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So 50,000 Native children went through this thing in that time. The program recruited children from Navajo country, a huge area covering parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, and then sent them to live during the school year with a white Mormon family. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Navajo Reservation and the surrounding area that I'll just call Navajo country. Mm-hmm. But I know a bit. I've spent a little time working on the reservation, and I've read a bit about Navajo culture and history. While it's crazy beautiful with vistas like Monument Valley and Shiprock and Canyon de Chelly, it is one of the poorest places in the United States. The median household income of a family of 5 is $20,000, which is well below the poverty line in the United States. Even today, 1 in 3 people there have no access to running water during a pandemic. Jesus. The unemployment rate was 50% before the pandemic. I can't find current stats now, but presumably it's much worse. And pandemic aside, the circumstances there today are far better than they were in the 1950s and 60s when the IPP started. At that time, there was basically no electricity, no running water at all, endemic poverty and constant food insecurity. The horrible boarding school system set up by the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, which operated under the unofficial motto coined by Indian school originator Richard H. Pratt, quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man," were engines of abuse and devastation to indigenous children all over the place. So for education, it was basically that or nothing, right?
Wow.
Or whatever your family could do for you. So the Navajo are either the biggest or the second biggest indigenous group in the United States, depending on who you ask. Their state of impoverishment was done on purpose, or sort of a side effect of attempts to exterminate them. In 1864, they were forcefully relocated in an event called the Long Walk, which was their own Trail of Tears, hundreds of miles from their traditional land in Arizona to southern New Mexico. It's not fully known how many died as a result of the events leading up to the Long Walk, the march itself, and then the time spent in exile and trying to return. But one estimate is crazy that had this group of Navajo being reduced from 25,000 to just a few thousand.
Wow. Oh, shit.
Total, with all their livestock and property totally lost. So by the 1930s, though, they had kind of bounced back. They'd returned to their land. They'd started over again with basically nothing. But they bounced back a bit with most of their wealth in large herds of sheep and goats, which were very valuable to them. But with the Great Depression raging and the Midwestern Dust Bowl howling, the federal government showed up and decided the Navajo were overgrazing their land, and with very thin evidence, seized and sold or euthanized more than 70% of their livestock.
God,
oh my God!
Damn it!
Tens of thousands of animals, annihilating any recovery from the attempted genocide of the Long Walk, plunging the entire society back into deep poverty. Most people believe this agricultural culling was just another attempt to starve them out of existence, right? Yeah. So it was just 20 or so years later that the Mormons saw an opportunity to, quote, help these impoverished Lamanites via a sort of foreign exchange program. Just one where the white kids didn't head south to the reservation for the year. It was a one-way street. just a personal note, I knew a lot of these kids. There were a ton of them in my 1,000,000% Mormon neighborhood in the late 1970s. So
Wow.
Yeah, I remember one of my best friends had one with him, and so he was with us all the time during that period of time.
yeah, our scoutmaster had a Navajo kid living with him, which is, and luckily for that kid, our scoutmaster was an incredibly decent dude, and so that's probably as good an outcome as he could have had. So I think foreign exchange programs can be fantastic, right? Like, what a great experience for an American kid to spend an academic year in Germany.
Right.
Or a French kid to spend one here in the U.S. In addition to picking up your language proficiency and a strong sense of culture, you have a lifelong connection to a family, right? But if there are Mormons in the mix, it ain't just learning about the Constitution and the ins and outs of barbecues these European kids are going to get, right?
No.
For any fans of Glengarry Glen Ross out there, the Mormons operate on the ABC principle. Always be converting.
Yes.
So I went to high school, like you guys probably did, with dozens of exchange students. For me, they were mostly from Germany, Belgium, and France, and one Japanese kid that is very dear to me and Uncle Doug, who were all placed with Mormon families. And as I recall, every single one of them was forced to go to church and was forbidden from any sort of their own religious practice or traditions.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was all of them, but so many of them, except for this one very tenacious Japanese kid, eventually threw in the towel and got baptized.
Yeah.
Mostly just to get a moment's peace. And then when they went back home, they threw their Books of Mormon in the trash. The Mormons abuse the exchange program as another form of missionary work, and they are relentless about it.
Yeah, I remember that would happen all the time. So many families had exchange students, and it was like nakedly, we're bringing these kids over here, and getting them baptized.
They were pretty open about it. They weren't terribly
totally
subversive. It was just part of their missionary work. So the Indian placement program served the same purpose, but with a generous helping of white supremacy ladled on top. Missionaries would troll the reservation, promising room and board and a good education to desperate families. But there was a catch, you see. You got to be a Mormon to qualify. So is now a good time for your baptism? The people running the program joked to each other that kids showed up to the first day of school with wet hair because they just got baptized to qualify. Ha, ha, ha. Desperation turbocharged by poverty is super funny, you guys. So what the Mormons got out of this was a threefold victory as they saw it. More baptisms. They are numbers obsessed. A chance to be the white saviors they felt destined to be for these poor fallen Lamanites, and a chance to de-Indian these Indians, just like the grotesque kill the Indian, save the man ethos. Don't believe me about the last two? Fools! You know I brought receipts. Remember when I mentioned Spencer W. Kimball earlier? Well, here he is proving my point in spades when he was one of the 12 apostles of the church. Remember, he would later become prophet pretty soon after, 10 years later, I think, in a very official conference talk in October 1960. I hope you have an empty stomach. So this is a talk called The Day of the Lamanite. And I quote, "The work is unfolding."
I'm sorry, but there's no way this is not going to be terrible.
Oh, there is no way.
The Day of the Lamanite. Here we go.
And I'm just exerting it. I'll put it in the show notes, the whole speech in the show notes. There's no better parts. The work is unfolding. The blinded eyes begin to see. The scattered people begin to gather. I saw striking contrast of the Indian people today as that of only 15 years ago. Truly dark scales are falling from their eyes, and they are fast becoming a white and delightsome people. Later he continues, "The day of the Lamanites is here. Young white missionaries throughout the church are happy in the service, glad that they were called to this special mission. Some planning to change their college majors when they return from their missions so they can work among the Indians. I see dependent people becoming independent. Dependent people. For example, I see them coming in their pickup trucks to meetings, whereas a decade ago they needed to be picked up by the missionaries, fed and coddled.
Oh, my God.
Some still must learn, but they are making progress. For instance, a party was arranged by two missionaries, the Indian people to bring the food, the elders to furnish the punch. When they assembled, they had only punch to drink. Later, another party was arranged, the Indians to bring food, the elders to bring the punch. They had both food and drink. They are learning.
Oh, my God. I'm sorry. I have to quit the show now
Yeah.
and go and kick myself in the face for ever being part of this group.
This man is a beloved figure in the Mormon Church.
He truly is.
Yeah.
Not
He's
all
a saint.
He was prophet, seer, and official Yoda of
Yes,
the Mormon
beloved
Church.
man.
Yeah, not all ex-apostles and former presidents and prophets of the church are beloved. He's one of them for sure.
Yeah, revered. He continues later. The day of the Lamanites is nigh. I know, he keeps telling us this. For years they have been growing delightsome, and they are now becoming white and delightsome, as they were promised. In this picture of the 20 Lamanite missionaries, 15 of them were as light as the Anglos. 5 were darker, but equally delightsome. The children in the home placement program in Utah, that's the program we're talking about, by the way, are often lighter than their brothers and sisters in the Hogans on the reservation.
Wow.
That is some crazy.
And yet more.
There's this moment where you think, okay, I get how we're judging whiteness because that's just sort of a chromatic scale. Fine.
Yeah.
How are we judging delightsomeness?
I don't know. I don't know what the delightsomeness scale is. I think it means Anglo culture. I
feel like it's how much of a boner he got looking at them.
Oh dear God. But yeah, I think it means are they presenting as white culturally as well as white physiologically, right? He continues. At one meeting, a father and mother and their 16-year-old daughter were present. The little member girl, 16, sitting between the dark father and mother, and it was evident she was several shades lighter than her parents. This is 1960, you guys. On that same reservation in the same Hogan, which is a Navajo home, subject to the same sun and wind and weather. There was the doctor, a doctor, in a Utah city who for 2 years had an Indian boy in his home who stated that he was some shades lighter than the younger brother just coming onto the program from the reservation. These young members of the church are changing to whiteness and delightsomeness. One white elder jokingly said that he and his companion were donating blood regularly to the hospital in hope that the process might be accelerated. He goes on.
Should we mention that the white and delightsome thing is a reference to a specific passage in the Book of Mormon that isn't there anymore?
Yeah, I'll come to it. Well, it's still there. It's just been modified. So
right.
He continues. I quote from a letter from an authority on Indian life and education. Just FYI, this is the classic vague anecdote with no name or attribution that is the meat and potatoes of Mormon talks. It's a tell, which means it's fucking bullshit, in case you couldn't smell it already.
100%.
Quote, I think you have a very commendable program and one which is probably the only positive approach to the Indian problem in the United States.
Okay.
I have spent part of my life living and working with Indian people and have yet to see any program which has taken the Indian out of himself and started him down the road to progress. Big finish. Woo! Big finish. God bless the Lamanites and hasten the day of their total emancipation from the thraldom of their yesterday. I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Did you just say the thraldom of their yesterday?
The thraldom of their yesterday. That is Mormon high talk right there.
That is, dear brethren, we are a racist church are we. You know what I mean? Like, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. So basically, quote, kill the Indian, save the man, with a saccharine sweet smile. And this is from a guy who I think truly, seriously loved indigenous people, if in a super fucked up, twisted way. And not all Mormon authorities did. I don't even get into that. But benevolent racism is still racism. There is a name for the purposeful annihilation of a culture, and that is genocide. And genocide where punch is served is still genocide. Violence against a child's identity is still violence, whether it's at the business end of General Custer's cavalry or in a stranger's home where room and board are provided. That a man that thought he was expressing true love and generosity to Navajo people with these ghastly, white savior, genocidal platitudes is a product of a fundamentally, foundationally white supremacist institution and belief system. The Book of Mormon talks about Native American Jews who became wicked, the ancestors of the Navajo, as being a dark, filthy, and loathsome people, cursed with a skin of blackness. it said, if they ever repent their evil ways, they may become white and delightsome people once again. To be clear, the sacred revealed Mormon Holy Book, inerrant and perfect, says, and as Dan correctly pointed out, said, but it's just been tweaked, that dark native skin is not the result of mutations and adaptations in populations over massive spans of time, but is rather an ancient curse for failing to adhere to an Iron Age Semitic orthodoxy that is unavoidably inheritable by blameless indigenous children. But their proximity to doctrinally superior whiteness can literally begin to cleanse these children of their inherited curse through becoming whiter. Heinous? Yes. Incredibly stupid? Yes. I personally think anyone who believes this out loud ought to be socked in the mouth. And here's what really complicates this. Good did come out of this program. Aside from the jaw-dropping benevolent racism of pious white saviors and instances of there were instances of actual abuse and cruelty and endemic cultural erasure, some of these kids who had the option of this or possibly no education at all got an education. Many of the families they lived with leveraged their privilege to open doors for these kids that wouldn't have been opened otherwise. Many of them went on to college and beyond, which was unlikely to happen on the reservation where the state and federal governments put these people into an out-of-sight, out-of-mind storage and just walked away. Mm-hmm. Mormon families with the best of intentions took in the children of strangers, oftentimes very young, like 8, 9, 10 years old, from a culture so radically different from white Mormonism, it's a wonder anyone involved could make it work, right?
Yeah.
But the choices Navajo parents made to send their children off with strangers were not so much a validation of the truth and superiority of white Mormon ideology, but they were rather a function of a society driven to the brink of extinction by a century of sustained malevolence from white colonizers. Can good outcomes come from a bad system? Sure. Does that cleanse the bad system of its DNA level regressive evil? No, it does not.
No.
The Book of Mormon and the faith it spawned are declaredly white supremacist structures. The axle Mormonism revolves around is that dark skin is evidence of ancient inheritable curses for sins against the creator of the universe. And therefore the inverse must also be true, that white skin is evidence of righteousness and favor granted by that same God. People cannot change their skin color unless they happen to be the president, and he's not fooling anybody. So Mormonism will always and forever remain foundationally a racist institution. So to conclude, there's another stream at work here. Yes, taking children out of their homes because you see their skin color as a curse, and therefore their fallen, wicked, pagan culture must also be washed away with their pigment is an act of genocidal erasure. But the Book of Mormon itself is an insidious act of genocidal racist chauvinism. And I don't just mean the parts about the curse of black skin. People from Asia found their way across the land bridge between Alaska and Siberia at minimum 15,000, as we discussed maybe twice that, years ago. An illegal infiltration Sarah Palin saw from her house but chose to say nothing. Over oceans of time, their progeny and new populations of nomads moved east and south, and over the millennia moved into every corner of these hugely diverse continents. A dizzying multitude of cultures, languages, traditions, foodways, and architecture sprung up from Baffin Island to Tierra del Fuego. The Mayans, the Inuit, the Sioux, the Inca, the Iroquois, the Seminole, the Mound Builders, the Anasazi, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Hopi, the Yakima, even the Navajo, etc., etc. The numberless stories of struggle and triumph and genius and love and war and art and victory and joy are totally negated by the pitifully laughable single 535-page book written by a rapey, money-digging fraud born in 1805 who knew not a single goddamn thing about indigenous American life, but insisted that no, that glorious spectrum of native people and civilizations didn't happen. All natives of these lands are the descendants of a single Jewish family who arrived here in 600 BCE and became unrecognizable as Old Testament Israelites because they pissed off that ridiculous old queen Yahweh. Stupid, plagiarized, ahistorical, pitiful. Mark Twain was spot on when he called the Book of Mormon chloroform in print, but it's actually much worse than that. The Book of Mormon is smallpox in print. Believing in it and sharing it is an act of genocide. and the erasure of tens of millions of human lives and so many of the world's most unique and astounding civilizations. Don't fucking do it. So the Indian placement program petered out. Both the Navajo and the official church lost interest. And while discrete edits, as Dan mentioned, have been made to the most overtly racist language in the Book of Mormon, the architecture of its foundational white supremacy still remains. Mormons, for the bulk of the church's existence, and many still today, believe skin color is an indelible marker of wickedness or righteousness, an unremovable symbol of spiritual rank. Casseroles, BYU football, a toxic stew of misogyny and homophobia, and white supremacy are the four legs of the stool of Mormonism. Pull one out and the stool falls. Truly, seriously, I don't think they could successfully excise the fundamental code of white supremacy and dark inferiority if they wanted to, and I don't know if they really want to. And I also think most Mormons would go to their grave denying it's even there.
I completely agree, and you know it's like so much racism. It is the bearer of it is oftentimes very ignorant of that fact.
Yeah,
and I think that most Mormons are. I think most Mormons would be shocked to read those words from 1960.
Sure.
And you always try and put yourself in the mindset of like, well, you don't, but you historically contextualize the words people are saying that would now be considered to be just absolutely out of bounds. But even some of that thinking in that language in 1960, you know what I mean, would be like shocking.
Yes, to decent people, I think it would be shocking. Remember, in 1960, the church was still 18 years away from rescinding its black priesthood ban.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you guys, I don't know. You say that. I personally revealed the fact that the Mormon Church had published an essay basically decrying all of the former racism and saying that was never real, that was never part of our thing, and distancing itself from a whole series of policies that they had held on to for most of their existence.
Yeah, 140 years probably.
And the guy that I revealed that to couldn't believe that was the case, that the church was distancing themselves.
Yeah.
It was so in the DNA of what he believed that the concept that they had distanced themselves shocked him.
Right, and remember when they if we're talking about the same essay, Dan, that was put out with no fanfare whatsoever.
Oh yeah, no, they didn't announce it. Which is why
it's hard to find.
When I pointed it out to him, he was kind of shocked and didn't believe me, and then I had to find it on their website and say, "Look, it's your own church that says that you're," because he was harboring all of those the retrograde beliefs.
Yeah, and I think the bulk. I would think the bulk of Mormons. This is kind of in their belief system DNA. And what's so crazy is there were good intentions in this thing, right? There were families acting earnestly to try to help in whatever way they understood help to be. Right. And they would be shocked to be considered racists or participating in a genocide, but that is simply what they were doing.
Well, and here is the one of the many inherent contradictions of modern-day Mormonism. Perhaps the biggest is the demographics. That this church will be majority minority if it already has not crossed that threshold in not very many years, meaning there will be more black and brown Mormons than white ones. And it's just an astounding contradiction for a religion based so obviously and fully on white supremacy.
And I don't think I made the point quite sharply enough, but it was generally the case that there were severe consequences for these kids ever speaking Navajo or acting, on their cultural, as they were kind of culturally raised. You showed up, the minute you showed up, that was over. You were a white person.
All those boys get a nice crisp haircut.
Yep.
And
new clothes. They're some of them showed up like days before school started.
You're absolutely right, Mark. This was not cultural exchange. This was cultural subsumption.
Erasure. Yeah. It's cultural erasure. So anyway, I know that was a bit long, but I was very much on my high horse there. So,
well, all right. Well, come dismount, and
yes.
we'll move along.
Off I go.
Gentlemen,
Hello.
listen, sometimes in this wild and crazy mixed up world,
Yeah.
and you know, the year of our Lord 2020 has given us some crazy wild times. There's still light in the darkness.
A little bit.
And sometimes that light in the darkness takes the form of people who enjoy our show enough that they've decided to part with a little bit of their own hard-earned cash so that they can show us some love, and that is amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now, Uncle Mark, you've got some that you need to talk about first. Is that
Yeah.
right?
So Dan put up a PayPal option.
A one-time donation button.
One time, but you can also do recurring on it if you want.
That's right. Which may or may not be working. We're still working with PayPal on that.
Yeah. So hang in there, Hal. We're going to figure it out. But very, very big thanks to Jake, who shared with us his resignation letter from the church. It was a beautiful moment. So thanks, Jake, and thank you, Hal, as always. And now to you, Dan.
Okay. And so on the Patreon side of the world, we need to thank Ian and Allie. Thank you so much. And I believe I'm the next up to do a saint.
Do it.
So I am going. So Jamie, you get a saint from me, and your saint is Saint Fred of Poughkeepsie.
Oh yeah.
And Saint Fred is the patron saint of old dudes with mustaches.
I feel seen.
Of business establishments with sketchy floors, and the patron saint also of delicious pork products.
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good one to have.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It's a deep well.
Yeah.
You can go to, and then I think Uncle Mark, I'm going to make you do a saint for Rocky.
Oh, Rocky. Well, of course, let's see here. Carry the 6. Your saint is naturally Saint Frydaddy of Sulphurdale.
Oh.
Yeah, beautiful town. And it's not. And Saint Frydaddy is the patron saint of fishwives, obviously, of hamburgers helpers, and of people who got cut from Cirque du Soleil in the last round of auditions, which is there's a lot of heartbreak there.
Day.
There's a lot of extremely flexible heartbreak there.
I was cut before I didn't make it in through the door.
No, you were security cut you.
My headshot and resume in hand, and yet was turned away quite quickly.
And you had the leotard and everything. It was a shame.
Yeah. I had the same experience with the Blue Man Group. It's fine. That's why I left Vegas.
It will be fine. It will be fine.
Thank you. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for
Wait. We forgot to finish, Dan.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me. Because everything has been going squirrely with how Patreon changing everything, and I'm still trying to sort that out. We missed a saint.
Oh.
Uncle Doug, please give a saint for our dear friend Taru.
I don't know how we missed you, Taru, and I'm so glad that I get to be the one to ensaint you. But Taru, your saint is Saint Dino-Mitanicus, the deranged.
Very deranged, yes.
Of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Wow.
Dino-Mitanicus is the patron saint of even-numbered Star Trek movies, also known as the good ones.
The good ones, right.
Carnivorous fruit bats. And
Carnivorous fruit bats.
Those are the ones that have gone mad. They've got the madness.
That's right. And days that you don't have to use your AK. For those are good days indeed.
For any Ice Cube fans out there, that's a deep cut. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Taru, I hope most are the days you do not have to use your AK, but I don't know. You can see Russia from your house.
That's right. Taru is closer to the AK than any of us.
Yes.
So wonderful. You're all amazing. You're stars in our sky.
Yes.
And speaking of stars, if you're not one that can give us money, but you still want to support us, how about just going over to, your iTunes, your Stitcher, wherever you listen to us, and giving us 5 stars and maybe write a little review, little thing says, hey, love them. They're amazing. Probably the best podcast of all time.
It's free. It's free. Look, I spent about 8 hours this week reading up on the fucking Indian placement program. Please spend 30 seconds and give us 5 stars to make me feel like it was worth it.
And any fewer than 5 stars and you're a bad person. That's
You're
just
a
how
bad, dirty person.
All right. Let's move on.
Moving on. Uncle Dan,
Hey.
you are many things. You are
How dare you?
You're a pre-Renaissance man. Whatever
Yes.
that means.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
among the many things you are is an actor.
Oh, that's true. Not now.
No,
Not
I don't
currently.
know. I don't know when you're at. This is how good you are. I don't know when you're acting and when you're not.
Well, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
But also, it's COVID-19, and there's no acting to be done. So
There's acting like you're not slowly going insane inside your house.
Yeah,
I'm not even attempting that. Nobody's that good an actor.
Yeah, I'm going to pull a Brian Wilson, and I'm just literally never going to get out of bed again. So,
Sounds great.
yeah. So acting
Yes,
is something people do. Doug,
can be sure.
All right,
That
why don't I
was,
just
that was the
take
big
it?
transition, Doug. You better take over.
That's the best we're going to get. All right. When last we met,
literally the best we're going to get.
Yes, when last we met a week ago, we tackled the first half of the rollicking roller coaster of action and mayhem that is the Book of Acts. So today, we're going to do the sequel, the Book of Acts Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. This time it's biblical. In Cyprus, no one can hear you scream, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the Red Sea. That's all the taglines I could find.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
Catchy.
Yeah. Let's dive in and get this over with. The story so far, well, as we discussed last week, this book is was authored by the same guy who wrote the book of Luke, and it picks up pretty much right where that book left off. We have the resurrected Jesus preaching to the remaining apostles, then launching off to heaven. We have the hapless exploits of Peter, who, when not busy causing the death of petty thieves, spends his time guilt-tripping Jews for killing Jesus, even though, they didn't.
Right.
We meet Stephen, the first martyr to the faith, and we see the message of Jesus begin to find its way out of Jerusalem in the lands of the Jews and into the lands of the Gentiles. And finally, we meet Saul, main baddie of his day to the Christians, who Jesus decides will be his man to the Gentiles. Saul has his epiphany, begins preaching the message of Jesus, and changes his name to Paul. Now, I forgot to mention this last week because we were kind of nearing the end of it, and I know we were all getting, low blood sugar. But it's often thought that Paul changed his name, or Saul changed his name to Paul at the moment of his conversion, and that was some kind of a differentiation between the two halves of his life, or the two different kind of people he was. That's not really what happened. He kept the name Saul for several chapters after his conversion, and then just kind of randomly changed it to Paul. So I forgot to mention that last week. It's often thought of as some kind of a sign of his new life, but that's not all the case.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what a weird thing to do. You're a weirdo.
Why didn't he just change it to Simon or Peter, like everybody else was doing?
Or Mark. Yeah, exactly. So at the end of chapter 14, which is where we left off, Paul and Barnabas sailed to Antioch, which is where we pick up the story in chapter 15, in which certain unnamed men were apparently teaching in the land of Judea that if you wanted to get into the Christian heaven, you had to pay the troll toll, and that toll was the tip of your penis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul
That'll happen.
Yeah. Paul and Barnabas felt like this particular prerequisite was going to dampen their missionary efforts, so they headed to Jerusalem by way of Phoenice and Samaria to discuss this with the rest of the apostles. Apparently, them Jews, they really loved their circumcision, mostly, I assume, out of jealousy of those who still had intact tackle. So the apostles gathered all the church together, and Peter, Paul, Barnabas, and James all took turns speaking to the gathered multitude to try and convince them to leave the tip, which eventually they did.
Can I ask you guys, what's your favorite Peter, Paul, Barnabas, and James album? Because
Oh, man.
there's just so much good to choose from.
I don't know.
But Leave the Tip is probably their best, isn't it?
The thrallness of their past. What was that we said a minute ago?
I can't remember the
Enthrallment of their past or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so this, by the way, so Peter
I
getting
think
up.
"Kiss Me in Galilee" is my favorite. Like,
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
it wasn't the biggest, most commercial hit, but there's
You
a
like
certain,
their acoustic stuff. I get it.
totally before they went electric. Yeah.
This little speech, by the way, by Peter marks the end of him in the book of Acts. He's done here.
This is the end of you.
Yeah. He doesn't show up anymore. So Paul, Barnabas, Silas, and Judas, and I meant to mention, the church did away with circumcision at this point. So Paul,
right.
Barnabas, Silas, and Judas, no, not that Judas. This one is also called Barsabas, traveled back to Antioch with the good news, which was very well received.
Yeah.
The chapter ends with an unexplained falling out between Barnabas and Paul, with Paul and Silas departing for Syria and Cilicia, and Barnabas and John. No, not that John. This one is also called Mark. No, not that Mark. Departing for Pamphylia. So in spite of all that just happened regarding circumcision, chapter 16 starts with Paul and Silas meeting a disciple in Lystra whose mother was Jewish but whose father was Greek. I'm not sure why this was a problem, but it was. And what was the solution they landed upon for this perceived issue?
Cut off his penis.
Circumcision. So,
Yeah.
Paul and Silas.
When all you've got is a weird little knife,
yeah,
every problem looks like a foreskin.
Make lemonade.
They did away with it, but for some reason it's back, baby, or at least for this guy. So Paul and Silas then traveled to...
He drew the short straw.
Totally.
Yeah, I guess.
Totally. Paul and Silas then traveled through Phrygia, Galatia, Mysia, and Bithynia, but the Holy Ghost forbade them from preaching the word of God in Asia for some reason. Finally, they arrived in a town called Troas, where Paul had a dream that they should go to Macedonia, which they immediately do. Then why did you even tell us about Troas?
Well, Doug, because that's where pants come from. If you were from Trous, you were a trouser. And you had a particular way of dress. So, small fact.
The
not
travelogue nature of this book is going to become an issue.
Okay. It already is for me, but that's okay.
It only gets much worse. Do you remember when we were kids and your aunt and uncle would come and make you sit through the slideshow of their trip to Greece? Remember that?
Oh, yes.
However painful and boring that was, at least there were fucking pictures.
Well, Doug, for us, it was just sitting through slideshows of trips to Nauvoo. But
That's true.
I wish it was Greece.
No shit. But imagine having your aunt and uncle just read you the itinerary. That's
Yeah.
the book of Acts.
Yeah.
So Paul and Silas head to Macedonia, but we need to know for some reason that they traveled through Samothracia,
Sure.
Neapolis, and Philippi to get there. For some reason, the narrative just switches. This is so strange. The narrative switches to the first person, and it's from the perspective of Silas. It's not explained, but it's really weird. You know, it goes from they went to this place. It's all of a sudden we went here. Yeah, it's very strange. In Macedonia, they meet a woman named Lydia, who is, quote, a seller of purple. Which is definitely what I'm going to say the next time a boss asks me where I see myself in 5 years.
Yes.
They baptize Lydia and abide in her house for many days. Things take a weird turn. A woman possessing a certain spirit of divination, such that she was useful to the local merchants due to her accurate fortune-telling, began following them around, declaring loudly that they were the servants of the Most High God. Rather than being happy about this, after a few days, Paul became annoyed and cast out the spirit.
She was supporting them,
Yeah.
but he was like, yeah, this is really bugging me.
I'm supporting and annoying, I suppose. Seeing this and realizing that they had lost their fortune teller, the merchants convinced the local magistrates to strip them and beat them and cast them into prison where their feet were bound.
Wow.
Yeah. By the way, we've bounced back into the third person again.
Okay.
Like you do.
Like you do. That night there was an earthquake that broke the prison doors open and loosed everyone's bonds. Yet Paul and Silas did not flee. Rather, they waited for the jailkeeper to show up, preached to him, and baptized him. So, in the morning, the magistrate...
That totally happened.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
In the morning, the magistrates sent their sergeants to release Paul and Silas. And Paul and Silas informed them that they were Roman citizens. This is interesting. And demanded that the magistrates themselves come and apologize, which they do. So end of chapter 16. So just the fact that the Roman citizenship gets brought up here and will again is an interesting change in this book. And we'll get there. Chapter 17 has Paul and Silas coming to Thessalonica, by way of Amphipolis and Apollonia, where they converted a shit ton of Greeks, but the hard-hearted Jews would not accept them, and they were forced to flee to Berea. In Berea, they were having some success but those dastardly Jews showed up back. The dastardly Jews from Thessalonica went to Berea and stirred the people up against them. Silas hid, but Paul departed by ship to Athens by himself.
This is amazing stuff.
So exciting.
I'm following exactly none of this, so I'm just enjoying all of the names.
Okay, because that's pretty much all there is to it. Paul finds Athens fully in the throes of idolatry, so he went to Mars Hill, the hill below the Temple of Mars, and delivered a fiery sermon which only served to get him ejected from the city. He did manage to convince a handful of people, including a man named Dionysius and a woman named Damaris, who departed Athens with him. Let's keep going. Chapter 18 has Paul arriving in Corinth and reuniting with Silas. They didn't stay long because their preaching stirred up those evil Jews, forcing them to take refuge in the house of a believer named Justus, but that's Justus, where Paul preached in private for a year and a half, gaining many followers. Even though he was steering clear of the synagogues, the Jews still resented Paul and brought him before the local magistrate Gallio. Paul delivered a defense so convincing that in a rare turn, the crowd turned on the chief rabbi, Sosthenes, and beat him. So that happened. And then there's long soliloquies by Paul. I'm not going to get into them. But I mentioned in last week that Paul showed a lack of contrition at the time of his conversion.
Right.
He retells his story repeatedly through the rest of the book. I mean, if you took away Paul telling his own story over and over from the book, it would be half as long. But he does talk about his being struck blind and having persecuted the Jews. So anyway, Paul eventually departs and journeys to Ephesus, Caesarea, and eventually back to Antioch, then on to Galatia and Phrygia again. Chapter 19 has Paul bestowing the gift of the Holy Ghost on believers in Ephesus and getting into it with local Jews. It's the pattern now.
Yeah.
So Paul left and spent the next 2 years in Tyrannus preaching and performing miracles. Paul eventually decides to head to Rome by way of Macedonia. He sends 2 emissaries, Timotheus and Erastus, to prepare the way for him. However, and this is something I've never really thought of before, there was in Macedonia a certain silversmith named Demetrius. His specialty was making silver shrines to Diana. And it seems that Paul's preaching presented a unique danger to his occupation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he gathered up all the other idol makers in the city, which apparently was a thriving industry in the city, and got everyone so riled up that they were ready to kill Paul when he arrived. A couple disciples managed to get word to him to stay away. End chapter 19. Chapter 20 Paul waits for the uproar in Macedonia to calm down, then passes through and continues to Greece to the city of Troas again. One notable thing that happens here.
It's funny how it always comes back to Troas.
I know.
He's
going back to Jerusalem, back to Antioch, back to it's just circles. One notable thing that happens in Troas is Paul is preaching a sermon that lasts so long into the night that a young man named Eutychus fell asleep and fell out the window to his death. Paul, of course,
wow.
I know, right? Paul brings him back to life and then heads to Assos. By the way, at this point, the narrative is just bouncing back and forth between the first and the third person, and it's never clear who's speaking in the first person.
Fun.
Yeah, if this book wasn't already hard enough to fucking read. And again, I don't know who's speaking, and I don't care. So, are you ready for some more travelogue? I thought so. Paul then travels to Mytilene, Chios, Samos, Trogyllium, Miletus, and finally back to Ephesus, where he spends the rest of the chapters preaching.
You know, Doug, I think you ought to teach classics in college. I want to see students watch you pronounce all these words.
You know, I'm waiting for both of you to fall out the window to your death.
Any minute now. I'm really close to the window. I'm about to auto-defenestrate.
Chapter 1 begins with some more travelogue. Okay. Paul travels to Kos, Rhodes, Patara, Phoenicia, Cyprus, Syria, Tyre, Ptolemais, and Caesarea again.
What do you think? Honestly, what do you think the value of that is? What was the author trying to import?
I don't
to the reader?
I don't know, because there are these long.
Is it mileage? Is that what equals truth in this book? Like, I don't get it.
It could so have been streamlined, because he goes from point A to point B, and it just in between is all of the points where they stopped along the way, where they did nothing. They accomplished nothing. They converted nobody. It's just like, oh yeah, they went through. Oh God, it kills me.
Guys, this was the first draft of Eat, Pray, Love. I don't know if you guys know.
Okay, in Caesarea, Paul
eat, pray, get martyred.
Yeah.
In Caesarea, Paul meets 4 virgins that prophesy to him. What did they say, and why did it matter that they were virgins? Who cares? There's more time for travelogue. Paul eventually finds himself back in Jerusalem, where Paul recounts everything that had happened in his wanderings. Everyone is so amazed by his exploits that they decided to shave their heads. As you do. Okay.
Sure.
Here I can hear you.
That makes total sense.
This guy is a regular Rick Steves over here.
Hey, I can hear you wondering, hasn't it been like half a chapter since the Jews took Paul prisoner? Never fear. Paul is captured and beaten by the Jews in Jerusalem, but before they could kill him, his Roman citizenship comes in handy again when a Roman captain demanded to know why the Jews were beating a Roman, to which they did not have a good answer. Paul kind of never gets out of captivity from this point on in the story. Yeah. Chapter 21 ends with Paul on the steps of the prison/castle, drawing a deep breath and saying, end of chapter 1. Chapter 22 begins with Paul recounting his exploits to the gathered masses in Hebrew. So he's speaking in Hebrew, which means he was speaking directly to the assembled Jews. He basically gives a rolling condemnation of their treatment of Jesus, Stephen, the other faithful, and himself. This seems to be a kind of closing argument against the Jews. This did not obviously sit well with them, who again rose up to kill him, and once again his Roman citizenship saved him. And you can really feel the narrative turning away from the Jews towards the Romans at this point.
It's like Paul, either Saul or Paul, his animating force was he just had to hate somebody.
Right. Exactly.
So he hated Christians, and then he was done hating Christians. Who's close? Jews.
Yep.
Yeah. Hell of a guy.
So chapter 23 starts with the assembled Jews laying siege to the castle where Paul was seeking refuge under Roman protection and launching a hunger strike until he's killed. I know.
Okay.
The Roman captain, getting a little skittish about things, sent centurions to Caesarea to instruct them to bring 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to safely convey Paul to the governor. The soldiers arrive and take Paul to Governor Felix, who agrees to hear Paul and his accusers out the next day. Chapter 24 starts with the trial of Paul in the court of Felix. Tertullus speaks for the Jews, accusing Paul of disturbing the peace. They know that accusing Paul of a religious crime or blasphemy won't do them any good, but his threatening the peace might. Paul then stood in his own defense, arguing that he was merely practicing his faith, which was allowed in the Roman Empire, and was not guilty of inciting violence or disturbance. Felix found him convincing but wanted to keep the Jews under control, so he kept Paul in prison for 2 more years, although he allowed him to have visitors.
That's good policy.
Yeah.
Firm but fair. Fair.
Why not? Chapter 25 begins with Felix's superior officer, Porcius Festus, arriving in Caesarea with the issue
is just getting absurd.
I know, right? Biggest dickus.
Yeah.
With the issue of Paul still hotly contested by the local Jews. Festus asked Paul if he's truly innocent, will he be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there, effectively getting this issue out of their hands. Paul requests that his appeal be taken directly to Caesar, knowing if he's turned over to the Jews, he's a goner. So Festus called for his superior officer, Agrippa, to come to hear Paul. Agrippa arrives with great pomp, and chapter 25. Chapter 26 begins with another trial of Paul, and Paul again describing in detail everything that has happened so far.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
His appeal is so...
Aaron Sorkin, this ain't.
No, for God's sakes, that's so true. His appeal is so convincing that Agrippa says, quote, "Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian," which is the second time that that word Christian appears in the Bible. And I forgot to mention this last time. The first time was back in chapter 11. So this religion has a name for the first time. The chapter ends with a pretty shitty decision by Agrippa. Basically, he says that he believes Paul's innocent, but because Paul appealed to Caesar, Caesar would have to make the call. So kind of a bummer.
Yeah, that's always a gamble in the legal system, right?
Exactly.
Maybe don't appeal that decision. Yeah.
Well, I'd let you go now, but you wanted this to go to the Supreme Court, so...
Yeah. Sorry, dude.
Chapter 27 begins with Paul, still a prisoner, sailing to Italy to go see, obviously, Caesar. Guess what, guys? It's time for some more travelogue. And once again, the narrative is in the first person for some reason. They sail to Sidon, Cyprus, Cilicia, Pamphylia, Myra, Lycia, Alexandria, Cnidus, Crete, and Salmone. Unfortunately, all this traveling meant that they were now in the winter, and the seas became rough. There rose a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. The wind had a name for some reason. The ship, now tempest-tossed...
They call the wind Mariah sometimes.
Yeah.
The ship, now tempest-tossed, seemed doomed, and passengers and crew were terrified, at which point Paul stood up and declared that he had seen an angel, and the angel told him that the ship was indeed doomed, but none of the 276 people on board would lose their life. Doesn't that seem like a bigger ship than...
That's a big ship.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after a couple more harrowing days at sea, they saw a rocky shore and ran the boat aground purposely on it because they were doomed. And the waves began destroying the ship, so everyone left off and swam ashore. End chapter 27. Guys, chapter 28. It's almost over.
All right.
But before we're done, let's see if we can't still cause some damage. The barbarous locals came to the aid of the shipwrecked, starting a fire to keep them warm. When Paul reached down to place a pile of sticks on the fire, a poisonous viper bit his hand.
Oh, no.
Yep. The locals thought he must be a murderer for having escaped his fate on the ship. He was meeting it here on the shore, which I kind of love. But Paul just pulled the snake off his hand and tossed it into the fire, suffering no harm. There you go.
Great.
The locals were obviously impressed and requested Paul come heal their leader, Publius, who lay sick of a, quote, bloody flux.
Oh, my.
Can you imagine what a bloody flux must have been looked like in that time and place?
Please don't tell me.
So Paul did.
Like a
and
chocolate fountain.
He stayed there for 3 months on this island and healing all the sick and possessed. Again, remember, he's still a prisoner. So, time for more travelogue, and you'll be glad to know this is the last one. They departed to Syracuse, Rhegium, Puteoli, and finally arrived in Rome. Once in Rome, Paul called for the chief Jews, hoping to appeal to them to have the charges dropped, therefore negating his having to go before Caesar. The Jews of Rome listened to Paul and said, "Who the fuck are you?" They had received no letters from Jerusalem. They had no idea who Paul was or why he was there. Oh. So, apparently that was enough to get him off the hook, and he wasn't required to go before Caesar.
Wow.
So, the whole book ends with Paul staying in Rome and preaching to all who would listen to him. There's no meeting with Caesar, no return to Jerusalem. It's just over. But this book is very clearly meant to fully separate the new Christian faith from its Jewish roots. Kosher laws and circumcision are dispensed with. It begins in Jerusalem and it ends in Rome. Its perspective on the Jews is less than flattering, laying all of the blame for the crucifixion at their feet, while its perspective on Rome is reverent and respectful.
Right.
Not only is Roman citizenship more appealing and useful than that of Judea, but Roman authority is fully recognized as supreme. And, the torch is clearly and obviously passed from Peter, whom Jesus stated would be the foundation of his church, to Paul, who never actually met Jesus, but whose eloquence with the Gentiles represented the only possible path forward for Christianity. So, in conclusion, think about that. Although Matthew and John, both written after Luke Acts, were definitely pretty anti-Semitic, it's here in the book of Acts where in less than one generation, the church that was founded by a devout Jew and made up fully of devout Jews, a guy who was executed by the Romans, became an avowedly anti-Semitic church now relocated to the seat of the Roman Empire. Whatever it was that Jesus founded and left to Peter, everything that comes after is Paul's church.
We have our Miscavige.
Yeah, it's always the second fucking guy.
Yep.
Always. And I'm not defending Brigham Young here or Muhammad or anybody, but it's like there's the dreamer and the visionary, and then the guy who comes next,
Yep.
is building concentration camps. It's always the case. It's like,
Pretty crazy. So there is the book of Acts. Everything left except for the book of Revelation in the New Testament is just letters and epistles.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the end of the action, so to speak.
Well, and what action it was.
Yeah.
Like this is the New Testament Jewish/Christian version of the beautiful Mormon primary hymn, "The Pioneer Children walked and walked and walked and walked
And walked and
and
walked.
walked."
and
For anybody
walked.
who hasn't heard that, try not to. But,
Yeah, exactly.
But
Well-
it's just a travelogue.
Well, we done
Well-
did it, guys.
There
Yeah.
you go. After all of that, I'm going to go need to take an epistle of my own, so
All right,
let's move on.
Let's go epistle.
Well, friends, that's it for this week's 150th show.
Wow. Hey, we'd love to hear from you. If you took an Indian into your home, please send us an email at howtoheretic.com.
Or if you have photographic evidence of a kind of mid, or a sort of mid, you can call us about it at 90388. How to, which is 903-884-6986. I'm also on Twitter at HowToHeretic.
And thanks to our awesome patrons.
And thanks to our ley line, Cody Layton, for editing the show.
And thanks to all of you friends for tuning in.
Bye, friends.
Bye-bye.